Yep, mic check 1 2 3, testing 1 2 3. Hello, hello, hello. Thank ya.
ABC 24 News starts right now with breaking news.
Good evening. Major breaking news tonight. 5.5 hours into deliberations in the trial involving those 3 former ex-cops of Memphis who are accused in the death of Tyre Nichols. We have a verdict. We just don't know what it is just yet.
Yes, the jury started deliberating at 11 this morning, so that's about 5.5 hours that it took. That usually says a sign that they were probably mostly on the same page here. We're talking about 3 different defendants. That's Tadarrius Bean, Demetrius Hailey, and Justin Smith. And that verdict, there will be separate verdicts for each one of those defendants, and that's on 4 counts.
4 counts. Those counts include excessive force and failure to intervene, deliberate indifference, conspiracy to commit obstruction of justice, and committing obstruction of justice. Those are the 4 charges, and if convicted, each of these 3 men faces a term of life in prison. So obviously a lot of nerves right now as we wait to see how this is all going to turn out.
We went from closing arguments yesterday, and that took about 5 hours, and then here it's about the same time for the jury to deliberate. The prosecution using a lot of their argument to talk about the video, the jury seeing the video over and over again to make their case and the nature of the audio of what these officers were doing. Defense taking their chance to say that the nature of the traffic stop called for that. So it's just going to be interesting to see how all of that played into their decision with the verdict.
Frankly, we thought that this was going to go into tomorrow, that there would be more deliberations tomorrow, but the speed of which the verdict has been reached, any defense attorney will tell you, usually suggests this is not good news for their client. We'll see, of course, but let's go to a timeline of how we got here right now. ABC 24's Leah Williams has been looking into that. Okay. All right, well, we want to just give it to you now, all right? Here's a look at how we got here. It all began the beginning of last year, January 7th, 2023, of course. That was the night of the traffic stop where those 5 former MPD officers are accused of beating Tyre Nichols.
3 days later, Nichols died in the hospital. MPD fired the officers later that month, and state charges for second-degree murder and kidnapping came shortly after. Now, January 27th, the city released video of that brutal beating.
Then between March and September of last year, City Council passed several police reform measures like ending traffic stops for low-level violations. Nichols' family filed a $550 million lawsuit against the city and MPD. And the Department of Justice, of course, launched its major investigation into MPD's patterns and practices.
And a grand jury indicted the ex-officers on federal charges. Last November, ex-officer Desmond Mills pled guilty with a recommended sentence of 15 years. Between January and February of this year, authorities released more than 20 additional hours of video and thousands of documents on the night of Nichols' beating.
So those plea deals are why we went from 5 defendants to 3 defendants, and those are the 3 that have been on trial now for the last going on a full 4 weeks.
And of course, that second officer, Emmett Martin, was the second one to change his plea to guilty and then got a recommended sentence of 40 years. All right, we're going to take Desmond Nugent live now. He's outside that federal courthouse with more on the verdict.
Richard Pepper, it took less than 7 hours, actually took less than 6 hours for the jury to deliberate, but a verdict is in. We don't exactly know what that verdict is, but we're still waiting to see if the former MPD officers, Tadarrius Bean, Demetrius Hailey, and Justin Smith, will or won't be convicted. We do know the jury had to make a decision, as you said earlier, on 3 cases, which are four counts, which is excessive force, failure to intervene, deliberate indifference, conspiracy to commit obstruction of justice, and obstruction of justice. Now, if found guilty, 1 or 2 of those counts, Bean, Smith, and Hailey could face up to life or 20 years to life in prison. Now, once we have a verdict, we will update you as soon as we can. Live in downtown Memphis, I'm Desmond Nugent.
All right, Desmond, thank you. So yes, 4 counts, up to 22 years to life is what Desmond just said. Those are for the 3 officers. That's Tadarrius Bean, Demetrius Hailey, and Justin Smith. We are getting word that we do know some of the verdicts in. We may know all of them. We're going to bring in one of our reporters here to break that all down. But again, 4 counts. Let's go over those. That's the excessive force, failure to intervene, deliberate indifference, conspiracy to commit obstruction of justice, and obstruction of justice.
Right. So, and we also know the penalty now is life in prison if convicted. You know, this all started 19 months ago. hard to believe.
Very much so.
When we first got word of the arrest of Tyre Nichols, and in our news coverage, there were reports that there was a man who'd been arrested, a FedEx employee, and he was in bad shape in the hospital after being arrested. And then we started hearing he's in very bad shape. He's on life support. And that's when there was the first protest by family members wanting some explanation. And of course, we all know what happened after that. So it's been just a long, laborious process. And here we are to this moment.
And the Nichols family looking for their justice. All right, let's take Desmond live now. Desmond, what all more can you tell us?
Richard Pepper, we just found out that after 6.5 hours, jury delivered a verdict to Tadarrius Bean, Justice Smith, and Demetrius Hailey. Jurors ruled that Bean was found guilty not only on one count, deprivation of rights, as well as the lesser charge. Bean was found not guilty for count 2, deliberate indifference, or the lesser charge. Bean was found guilty for obstruction of justice. Hailey was found not guilty in count 1, but was found guilty in the lesser charge of bodily injury. Hailey was found not guilty for count 2, but found guilty in the lesser charge of deprivation of rights resulting in bodily injury. Hailey was found guilty of conspiracy to commit obstruction of justice and count 4, which is obstruction of justice. Now, again, we will bring more information when we have it here at the federal building. Live in downtown Memphis, I'm Desmond Nugent.
All right, thank you very much, Desmond. When you have 3 defendants involved, it gets a little confusing, and 4 counts for each one. But it sounds like, as we look at the other defendants here, that a majority of the charges, the defendants were found not guilty.
Right.
But when it comes to the obstruction of justice charge, which of course is the evidence that shows the many lies that were told about what actually happened that night when Tyre Nichols was arrested, that has caught up with him, because that was one of the strongest cases made by the prosecution, and very well documented too.
Right, and I think it's important to note that, like you said, 3 different defendants and 4 counts each. So the jury is going through and discussing each one and how they all of them played into each one. So to come to this verdict in 5.5 hours for each one of them, sounds like, or at least we can infer that maybe they were on the same page for them. But right, guilty for obstruction seems to be the one that is the common consensus. It is important to mention this jury. I mean, Judge Mark Norris, who oversaw this federal trial, really harped on the part that race plays into all of this. And so it was important to have a diverse jury. We know that the jury talk was a big discussion with the defense attorneys, even asking to get a jury from out of our area. But we know that on the jury, there were 4 white men, 4 black women, 3 white women, and 1 black man that helped make this decision.
So majority white jury,
Yes.
7 to 5 in terms of the count black and white. And yeah, I think that was very important, not only for prosecutors, but for defense attorneys too, and the judge, wanting to make sure that everyone had a full breadth and full appreciation for what this case meant.
Yes, I think if we can we take Desmond again, and then Desmond just really go over the verdict one more time with each count of each defendant.
And Desmond, if you could also give us an idea of what the mood was during those, what we think by our count is 5.5 hours, you said 6.5 hours, 5.5 hours that everyone was waiting around to see what the jury was going to decide.
I guess we'll wait until we know we can get Desmond back up. But yes, the number here, the amount of time it's taking them to make this decision is huge. This is a 19-month span that has been waiting. It's a long anticipated trial, lots of eyes on it. Desmond, we're hearing that it is ready now. Desmond, did you hear us?
Yeah, Richard and Pepper, I can hear you. Jury deliberation started around 10:15 this morning. That's why it took about 6.5 hours for them to come up with a decision. But I actually wasn't able to speak on Justice Smith, the former MPD officer, as far as his verdict. We found out that Smith was found not guilty in count 1 for deprivation of rights and not guilty in the lesser charge, which committed crime. Smith was also found not guilty in count 2, as well as the lesser charge of deprivation of rights resulting in bodily injury. Smith was found not guilty in count 3, but was found guilty of obstruction. The three former MPD officers charged in the death of Tyre Nichols were on trial for about 4 weeks and 4 days. Right now, it is a split decision. Smith on count 4, Bean on count 4, Hailey on lesser charges for count 1 and count 2, which resulted in bodily injury. In counts 3 and 4, they were found guilty. Again, we will bring you more information as it becomes available. Live in downtown Memphis, I'm Desmond Nugent.
Okay, so we have, just looking at the breakdown of the three defendants here, if we could put their faces up on the screen there so people can actually picture who we're talking about. We have Tadarrius Bean, who was found not guilty of the first 3 charges in this case, but found guilty of obstruction of justice. We have Justin Smith, who was also found guilty of, not guilty of the first 3, but guilty of that 4th charge, obstruction of justice. And then when it comes to Hailey, Demetrius Hailey, he was found guilty of 2 of the 4 charges.
Right, and those last 2 were the conspiracy to commit obstruction of justice and obstruction of justice. You know, one of the things that was big in the closing arguments was the excessive force talk, and they brought in a 30-year veteran on the force, or a former law enforcement officer, to explain whether or not they violated MPD policy, and that veteran got up there and said that they didn't. He had absolutely believed that they did not violate policy. So obstruction of justice clearly is the common denominator here for all 3 of these defendants, and the jury found that they were not guilty on the others.
Right, and then we had the plea deals that were made by Emmett Martin III and Desmond Mills Jr. It was Emmett Martin III who pleaded guilty most recently. But those plea deals were interesting too, because when they took the stand and testified what happened, and the remorse they had over what happened, and the responsibility they felt their fellow officers had, that was pretty dramatic testimony too. And I think that's really what might have helped the jury come to that guilty conviction on obstruction of justice.
Now, we are hearing that the 3 defendants, Tadarrius Bean, Demetrius Hailey, Justin Smith, they have all been taken into custody by U.S. Marshals into protective custody. And we know that's going to be a whole nother conversation about how their actual prison sentence and what they're going to be dealing with in there as former cops, and protective custody and everything they're going to need. Yeah,
some defense attorneys I've talked to said it will be very interesting to see if the state trial, which is supposed to start next month, whether that even happens. Because when the federal case, if you get convicted in federal court, just being honest here, the federal prisons do a much better job of protecting former law enforcement officers who are in custody for something like this, because there is a security risk, a safety risk for these defendants if they're locked up. And a state prison system usually is not as good about protection. Or the other issue too is you can move a defendant in a federal case to Arizona if you want to, and have them locked up there.
Yes, and we are hearing that their sentencing date is January 22nd of 2025. That's next January. And again, that's up to life in prison for these counts.
Yep.
So lots to still come from this. Again, that's Tadarrius Bean, Demetrius Hailey, Justin Smith. If we could get a graphic up of what they look like, their attorneys. Tadarrius Bean was represented by John Keith Perry. Demetrius Hailey was Michael Stengel. Justin Smith was Martin Zumach.
And we expect to hear from those attorneys. I expect when they come out of the courtroom, they'll have to talk with their clients first, of course. I also expect that we'll hear from Rovon Wells and Rodney as well, the parents of Tyre Nichols, who have been in the court most days, I believe. There were some times when they had to leave the courtroom because the testimony was just too troubling, or the video they were showing was too troubling. But by and large, they have been, through thick and thin on this entire case.
Yes, since jury selection, and this is a 4-week-long trial, so that's a long time to be going every day. But they have been there since the first day of jury selection. And again, we can talk about the jury makeup. That's 12 jurors, 4 white men, 4 black women, 3 white women, and 1 black man who came to this decision. Now, a lot of the jury selection talked about the have to see that video over and over again. We know that video is traumatizing. We give a disclaimer every time we even put it up on our airways.
And we don't show the worst of it.
And we don't show the worst of it. So imagine having to sit there and really go through it piece by piece from both the prosecution and the defense side, and then having to digest that and really come to this decision.
Yeah. So when you think about what's next, there is this issue of sentencing, which we've told you will happen in January, an obstruction of justice guilty conviction now for all 3 defendants, and there is this state trial that will also supposed to be taking place. We'll see whether or not that happens.
All right, yes, so 4 weeks ends now with a verdict on, I'm almost forgetting what today is now. So much has happened. Oh, October 3rd.
October 3rd, yeah.
Yes, so 4 weeks we come to a verdict, and you are right, all guilty on counts 3 and 4 for Hailey and counts 4 for Bean and Smith.
So as we think back as how all the different things that have happened since this terrible tragedy involving Tyre Nichols, you had someone else I expect we'll hear from soon is Ben Crump, the attorney representing the Wells, Tyre's family. You had a vice presidential and presidential nominee coming to Memphis to represent as many of the figures around the country and world that came in and expressed their grief for what happened to Tyre Nichols. Reverend Al Sharpton, of course, came too. And all this taking place in an area near Rains Road and Ross Road in southeast Memphis, Hickory Hill area, and prompted numerous investigations, not just the criminal investigation, but several involving the Department of Justice as well.
Yes, the pattern or practice investigation of the City of Memphis and the Memphis Police Department. On July 27th of 2023, and that is not related to the Tyre Nichols case, is what the DOJ said, but this Scorpion unit actually did uncover a lot of previous cases of the nature of how some of these traffic stops or incidents with MPD had actually happened and unfolded, and we know these 5 former officers were a part of that Scorpion unit. So lots more came from this case. We're going to take it back to Desmond now. You can imagine just this verdict coming out, the feel outside of the federal courthouse. Desmond, what are you hearing? What are you seeing? Who have you talked to?
Right now, we're still, Richard Pepper, we're still waiting for some of the supporters and family of Tyre Nichols to come out, as well as the defense attorneys for the former MPD officers, Tadarrius Bean, Demetrius Hailey, and Justice Smith. But right now, we did see about 2 supporters of Tyre Nichols who just seemed like they've really felt defeated. They really felt as if, like, you know, they thought justice for Tyre Nichols was going to happen today. And so we haven't been able to talk to any one of them because they essentially stormed out of the federal building, so I wasn't able to catch up with them. But we are hoping to hear from both sides from this particular trial. And so when we do, we'll bring you more information. Richard Pepper.
Well, that is interesting, Desmond, that was the reaction, because they were exonerated, most of the defendants, of 3 of the 4 charges. And if I'm a friend or a family member of Tyre Nichols, I might have been hoping that all 4 counts might have been guilty verdicts, but that was not the case here. And the only defendant who, I guess, got convicted of the most counts is Demetrius Hailey, who was found guilty of counts 3 and 4. It will be very interesting to hear from Ravon Wells and Rodney Wells and their attorneys about whether they feel justice was served in this trial.
All right, we will be right back after this break.